All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We'll let everybody trickle in here. We're really excited to have the Design for Freedom team here with us at Acelab. We know this is a little different from our typical webinars, but we're really excited for today's presentation and we're glad you're here. So my name's Kayla. I'm here representing the Acelab team, and we have Nora and Brigid and Jacqueline from Design for Freedom. So um, before we get started, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. We will be doing Q&A at the end of the presentation. You'll see a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can click that, drop any questions that you have throughout the presentation. We will get to as many as we can at the end. And this is also an AIA-approved presentation. So we did already collect your AIA numbers upon registration, but if you're worried that we didn't get your number, I'm also going to go ahead and put a form in the chat. You can fill that out to make sure that you get credit for the presentation today. And then we will also do a post-webinar survey. So we really appreciate any feedback that you have. Feel free to leave anything like that there at the end. And with that being said, I will go ahead and pass it over to Nora and Brigid to get us started.
Thanks, Kayla. We're super excited to be here today. I'm Ethical Materials Director at Grace Farms Foundation, and alongside Brigid Abraham, our Design for Freedom Project Manager. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to learn more about what we do on a daily basis. We think it's super important to our industry and are so happy to have you here today. This is where we get to go to work every day. So wanted to share, this is Grace Farm, located in New Canaan, Connecticut. We are in a sauna-designed river building on 80 acres, open to the public, accessible to anyone who wants to come visit us 6 days a week, and always free admission. So if you're ever in the area, please do stop by. It's a beautiful site to explore. And part of our nonprofit organization, so we are Grace Farms Foundation, a nonprofit and humanitarian and cultural center. Just losing a little advancement here. Hold on. Okay, one moment, bear with me. Okay, here we go. It is not going. Brigid, can you try and advance to the
right here
to the mission statement, if possible?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So sorry about that. Our humanitarian work is to end modern slavery and foster more grace and peace in our local and global communities. And this includes the initiative that both Brigid and I work on, which is the Design for Freedom movement to eliminate forced and child labor from the building materials supply chain. And as you can see, the river building is a really incredible structure. It is very porous to the natural world around it, and so really blurs the lines between the built environment and nature. You can see our courtyard area here and our beautiful organic garden that we have on site. I'm trying to advance. There we go. Our common space. These tables were made with wood that was felled on site during construction. This is what we call our sanctuary space. It's our largest space at Grace Farms, where we host our annual Design for Freedom Summit. You can see there our CEO and founder, Sharon Prince, not only the visionary behind Grace Farms and the foundation, but also the Design for Freedom movement as well. So Design for Freedom is a movement, as I mentioned, but it's really a radical paradigm shift in the way that we're thinking about our supply chains and how materials are being harvested, extracted, fabricated, produced, and then transported to our job sites around the world. The built environment, we know, has a relationship with nature and people, but the question that we're really asking folks to think about is is your building ethically sourced as well as sustainably designed? And if we think about really the capacity of the construction industry, so it's one of the largest global industrial sectors at the highest risk of embedded slavery. The construction-related spend globally is $13.7 trillion. So again, an enormous responsibility here in the amount of goods that we're specifying and procuring. The modern slavery criminal industry worldwide is valued at $236 billion, with $63 billion worth of goods made with forced labor. So as we think about what type of materials we're talking about, and Brigid is going to really dive into this in some detail at the second half of our presentation, but we've identified the 12 highest risk materials that we are all used to dealing with every day. So I think a great way to kind of frame the conversation and to start to think about this is we've really seen the sustainability movement and the green design movement really move from climate justice and climate action over the last couple of decades, certainly incorporating human health and well-being, and of course, embodied carbon. This is really kind of the next step in what we're talking about when we talk about ethical decarbonization and ethical material transparency. So we see this social health and equity part of material transparency as really being the next important element to looking at materials holistically. We do align ourselves really closely with the United Nations SDG targets. So if we think about these sustainable development goals that have been globally adopted over the last few years, and we think about what some of the goals are, and being decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, and of course, climate action. Design for Freedom really encompasses all of these goals kind of wrapped up together. The other thing is we're really aligned with the AIA Materials Pledge, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, specifically focused around social health and equity. So Design for Freedom has been included in kind of the where to start when thinking about the Materials Pledge and how to meet the goals of that. In addition, the Common Material Framework, which I know Acelab has really been partnering with Mindful Materials, as well as Design for Freedom is a partner to Mindful Materials, thinking about the 5 buckets of the Common Materials Framework. So again, kind of aligning this sustainability, carbon impact, material health together and holistically sourcing products. So thinking about ecosystem health, social health and equity, which is where Design for Freedom fits in mostly, circular economy, climate health, and human health. The other thing to consider with Mindful Materials is that, like Grace Farms, Mindful has really been a great partner to already existing and established building certification. So working very closely with USGBC, with Living Future, with IWBI, I mentioned AIA. So really this movement has taken on a new level of collaboration and alignment that I don't think we've seen at this level in any time of modern construction, and certainly within the full ecosystem of the built environment. So it's really exciting to see all these partners coming together. So when we talk about forced labor, and we talk about this being a pervasive issue, we are talking about 28 million people trapped in forced labor conditions around the world today. And what does that mean? So we have to start kind of at the umbrella term, which is modern slavery. This is really any situation of exploitation. Within that umbrella, we see more defined terms. So we see forced labor, we see human trafficking, we see forced marriage, we see child labor, human trafficking. And so all of those kinds of more specific levels of exploitation all fall within this umbrella of modern slavery. Design for Freedom is really heavily focused on these 2 issues, so forced labor and child labor. Forced labor is all work or service performed involuntarily or under the threat of any penalty. As I mentioned, 28 million and occurs in every region of the world. Child labor is work that deprives children of their childhood and is mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful or interferes with their schooling. So right now we have 138 million child laborers around the world. Those are kids ages 5 to 17. And within that bucket of 138 million, we see 54 million children working in hazardous conditions. So as we think about child labor and what this means globally, this circle represents the percentage of all children around the world. So 7.8% of children around the world fall into this category of child laborers. And over 3% of children around the world fall into this category of children working in hazardous conditions. There is a sliver of good news in all of this. In 2024, we finally saw the child labor numbers dip. So we had seen this increase in 2020, where child labor numbers had gone up to 160 million. And we have seen them just recently fall back down to 138, as I mentioned. So good news on the horizon that we are now again trending in the right direction, but obviously still a lot of work to do. And again, I mentioned the hazardous work sector, hazardous work by sector. And if we look at where these children are working, it is in the agricultural sector, it is in construction, manufacturing, and mining, and then retail and domestic services. We know the agricultural industry feeds the construction industry in terms of some of the textiles and agri-fiber products that are within our materials. And of course, we know construction, manufacturing, and mining are directly related. Another newer kind of research endeavor that we've been embarking on is really focusing here on the United States. So we know that child labor and forced labor happens globally. The United States is not immune to that. We have over 1 million here in the United States working in forced labor conditions. But we also have a very unique problem here in the United States, which is prison labor. And this is something that we've got the highest incarceration rates on the planet. We hold 1.2 million people in prison every year, and we have more than 20% of the world's incarcerated population. If we look at it on a state level, all 50 states individually incarcerate more people per capita than most countries. So we chose Connecticut here as an example, just because that's where we're based, but I could put any one of the 50 states here and we would still be at the top of this list. So what does this mean for our industry? Why is this important to us? 49 states require prisoners to produce goods and manufacture products. And over 70% of incarcerated folks here in the US in state prisons are required to do this work or face retaliation, such as solitary confinement, denied family contact, or even parole. On average, these workers make between 13 and 52 cents per hour. Some of them are not paid at all. And on top of those incredibly low wages, up to 80% is taken in government fees. We are very unique in that the US is the first country in the world to privatize prisons. Today, about 8% of confined people in the US are held in private prisons, and those companies have an annual profit of almost $6 billion. In addition to private prisons being used to hold folks who have been convicted of a crime, we've got more than 90% of the 30,000 daily immigrant detainees here in the US held in private prisons. And I know that we've just recently started to see some more attention to this issue, but this is something that's been going on for a long time. Some of these immigrant detainees in the thousands have also been subjected to forced labor while in detention, even though they have never been convicted of a crime. So Design for Freedom is shedding a light on the use of prison labor in the goods that are making their way into our building. And we'll have more to share on that at the end of this year. But just also to recognize, as we think about the AIA Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, that we are also asking designers and contractors to think about how they are designing spaces. And the AIA Code of Ethics specifically prohibits design of spaces intended for execution or solitary confinement. We've got some great architectural partners who have already determined and decided that they will no longer design or build prisons here. We do have 3 overarching design for freedom principles that I want to be sure to get to before I pass this over to Brigid, who's going to jump in more on materials and specific projects. But the first principle is finding and addressing embedded forced labor. So thinking about how are we profiting from the slavery or exploitation discount. We are asking everyone within this industry to know your risks back to raw material extraction, work in collaboration, and promote transparency and the decent work agenda. Our second principle is pursuing ethical decarbonization. I mentioned that earlier, but it's really recognizing this link between the climate crisis and embedded forced labor in our buildings. Sustainable solutions are not sustainable if they are made with forced labor. Great example of this is solar panels. We know that we need renewables to meet a lot of our climate goals, but the vast majority of solar panels are made with polysilicon that is sourced under some very risky situations and likely to have forced labor in its supply chain. The third principle is prioritizing circularity. So thinking about how we can be reusing, recycling, repurposing the already existing materials within our supply chain. If we are avoiding raw material extraction or the use of virgin materials, we're essentially reducing that risk of forced labor to 0 as we reuse these materials. And I do want to reiterate again, I talked about collaboration, I talked about industry alignment, but Design for Freedom is really, I lost my slide. Design for Freedom is really focused on this idea of the full ecosystem of the industry coming together. So we are not expecting designers to solve this problem. We are not expecting contractors to solve this problem or manufacturers to solve this problem in silos. We want everybody working together. This is a huge issue, and we recognize it's going to take all of us. And now I'm going to pass this over to Brigid, who's going to jump further into materials.
Great. Thank you so much, Nora. I'm glad to join everyone today for this discussion with Acelab. So I'm going to focus here as a project manager, thinking a lot about our at-risk materials. So if you're not familiar with Design for Freedom, we do have an international guidance and toolkit, and we have several different resources available on our website. This is our most recent body of research that was launched and published in December of 2024. You can download this here via the QR code or look on our website for more information. And so I'm going to actually frame some of these materials conversations a lot like our toolkit. And it'll be kind of an introduction of how to read the toolkit, what to look for, and how to dive in further. So overall, we have 12 major materials and groups here that we look at for the high risk of embedded forced labor. Some are composite materials and some are raw materials. And you can certainly look at this list and say there is absolutely no way I can build a building without at least one of these, probably more within your projects. And overall, we do have a dedicated chapter for each material type that were mentioned on the previous slide. So in the metals section, you'll learn some information such as inherent qualities or contributing factors of human rights violations related to that material type. So for example, with metals, 60% increase in global raw material extraction will happen or is projected to happen by 2060. A lot of times with metals are often mined, and there are areas of exploitation that the mines could be controlled by military or organized crime. Also, there could be these smaller artisanal mines that are common in metal extraction, and with smaller groups, they are not able to unionize, and therefore labor wages are often wages are often very low and under far well below living wage. And then lastly, thinking also, again, as Nora had mentioned, thinking about how the climate crisis and human rights violations often work hand in hand. So 65% of undeveloped copper reserves are located in direct proximity to biodiverse conservation areas. So thinking about vulnerable areas on multiple levels. Again, in the metal section, Design for Freedom, and we'll get into this a little bit further, certainly as we talk about our overlap and work with Acelab, but there are certifications. So there are responsible sourcing certifications out there, some like the ASI, Aluminum Stewardship Initiative, that's really thinking about certain specific materials. Or they can be even wider, such as Responsible Mineral Initiative, but we do break those out within each of our sections to really familiarize people with these different certification types. So those are available as well. And then each section really dives in even further. I'm sure, cobalt we like to bring out here, knowing that cobalt is so tied to many of our batteries. It is one of those metals out there that is very, often spoken about or is, comes up into the news. So there's two sets of data here, which I feel like is very interesting. First, on the left, we're thinking about where world reserves of cobalt. So where does cobalt exist naturally in the world? So you have the DRC on the top line there, about 47%. And then if you look towards the right at the pie chart, you actually see that about 73% of cobalt is mined and supplied worldwide. So even understanding that the reserves exist in other areas of the world, but due to the way our supply chains are organized and run, and those areas of laborers are exploited, it becomes more top heavy over towards those vulnerable communities. And this is, something to be very much aware of as we look towards 2030, where that global demand of cobalt is projected to increase 260%, which is staggering to think about. Excuse me. Another really interesting material that we put into the toolkit is PVC. Now, PVC is interesting. You've probably heard of it before. It's often used in medical areas or in gyms. It's a resilient flooring. A few contributing factors. There's a lot of chemical exposure for potential health risks that happen along the supply chain. So this is a really interesting conversation about thinking about the health effects within our materials and also thinking about obviously labored, but again, going back to that conversation about hazardous conditions. So if those within the supply chain are exposed to chemical or harmful chemicals along the way, then that could eventually affect the end user. But again, thinking about the full supply chain in general. And that's also thinking about those communities. So communities in proximity to production facilities are at a higher risk for potentially developing cancers or other effects of airborne toxins. And PVC is largely 10% of the world PVC is actually made in the Uyghur region of China. We know this area of the world is actually populated by many of the Muslim populations within China are actually removed from their home and forced to work in the detention area of Uyghur. So there's forced labor is very rampant in this area. And a lot of PVC is actually coming and is made, and the amount of PVC since the pandemic has actually increased, and with that has increased its market share. So, and then we actually had some really interesting statistics thinking about that differential of what this really looks like. So there was a note about externalized savings for PVC resin made in the Uyghur region is a mere $100 per ton. So thinking how on the very early level of the supply chain, you can make a very large impact on those who certainly need it. And it's also another interesting piece to think about. We want to be talking about certifications that look at material transparency across their supply chain, not just one tier or another. So oftentimes, sustainability certifications are looking at just what maybe an assembly place or something that happens here in the United States, but that those materials are being extracted or further manufactured earlier on and then shipped here. So really, we want to look for certifications that often say chain of custody or responsible sourcing across their supply chain, and that's an important point to make here. And we have a really interesting quote with one of our partners at Jim Vallette, and he says, the world's most toxic industries concentrate in locations where environmental and human rights protections are the weakest. The poison plastic PVC follows this pattern. And so, yeah, it's something very interesting to continue to follow and think about materials as we both market them and what really is happening underneath those certifications and levels. And then, so that's just a bit of an overview of some of our materials. And so we highly encourage you to take a look and dive in even further to many of those other categories available to you. We have in the final section as our actual toolkit. So we developed these tools. And as Nora also mentioned, thinking about that full ecosystem of the built environment, and everyone has agency to bring one of these tools or your own set of tools into your consultant conversations, team conversations. Even, we put media and activists in that sense as well to continue to bring to light this issue, to normalize these questions, and to garner a further support as a collective agency. So we have two different sets of tools here, and I'll run through these a bit, and we highly encourage you to take a look yourselves. These are all downloaded. You can download these individually on our website as well. We have an engagement letter. This obviously can be an email, and we encourage you to adjust, but it just gives you a little bit of formal language here and metrics to help you formulate your own conversations with some of those teams and suppliers. We also have ethical design requirement specifications. This is a general specification that we've actually had helped develop this with Gensler back in 2021 and 2022. So really thinking on a high level across your project. And in addition to that, we also have developed just this past year division specs, and there's actually a sample wood sample spec in there as well. So interesting to note with Design for Freedom pilot projects, we actually do suggest that teams do not, create an expectation that all across all of your materials will need to be researched, but to try to start small and to start to think about, maybe I want to take a look at 5 or 10 materials on my project, or maybe I just want to focus on one main structural material and see what kind of impact I can make there. So that's where these sample specs come really into play. And then you have your responsible certification. So I had mentioned previously in the metals and section. It's interesting to see here, we actually made this available both in the print form that you can look through and peruse and kind of see their subtleties and differences there throughout. And then also on our website, it's available to have an Excel doc you can download, and you can search by material type or focus, etc. So those are available. And that actually leads us right here to our overlap, and not really overlap, really collaboration and partnership. So in May earlier this year, we made a strategic partnership announcement with Acelab. In addition to that, we had Dave Lamont and Varda Mehta from Acelab join us at our Design for Freedom Summit, which is our largest Design for Freedom event every year, thinking and really talking about how Acelab can help further this work together. And we have several very close collaborations and partners that we work with, both from ASSA ABLOY on a manufacturer level to a designer, architect, and Bloomberg also as well, thinking about an end user and as an owner as well. So, and then of course, mindful materials, as we mentioned before. So really coming at this program as, bringing that sort of ecosystem into play here, and using a lot of those certifications and frameworks that are already mapped out within the toolkit, and bringing that into the manufacturing data and product data that can be made even more available and into the designer's hands to make better and more informed decisions. So it's been a really wonderful collaboration. And as we know with AI, everything gets a little bit smarter and better all the time as we have more people asking about the Design for Freedom framework and asking these questions and really looking to use these decision-making opportunities. And so that sort of ends our first section of tools. We do have a second section of tools that, that the first section really thinks about how do I engage and initiate conversations? How do I leverage information that's already out into the world? And this second section now is really a lot of the tools and information that we use on our pilot projects and how we do our own research and investigation. And these tools and the information that we've been able to procure through our pilot projects has really compounded over the years, and we've been able to refine the questions, be as inclusive as possible, and really target our approach even further. So with our first assessment tool is the self-assessment questionnaire. This questionnaire has actually been simplified. It has a yes, no sort of indicator process. So it's what we use on all of our pilot projects. It also is organized around our principles as well. So also thinking about your carbon questions, your circularity questions. We do mention prison labor on here as well. So it's overall, and it's really a nice introduction into understanding a supplier, and we encourage you to send this out to many of your different suppliers. In addition, we have the STRT. So if you want even further and more specific information, this is in an Excel format. That's also available to be downloaded on our website. And this is a tool that we actually received back through one of our pilot projects and thought that this would be another further useful tool. Then we have the ethical materials tracking schedule. So as we said, mentioned on our pilot projects, this is a nice way to really map out some of the different materials on that you may be utilizing, perhaps even some of the different components, and really getting all of the information that you can out there. Linked to this tracking schedule is also our certification list, so that information is already ready to go. And then we also have, lastly, our supply chain technology interoperability chart. So this chart is really a representation of about a year-long project that we worked on with AIA and a few other members of our working group, really looking at different technologies that are out there, how different parts you can see sort of down below this kind of heat map here, how there's different doors in to the supply chain and where people are finding that they can find different technologies and that are relevant. The important point here is that there is not one, perfect end-to-end tool, but it's important to have different sources of information that can be pulled together, like our friends at Acelab as well, to kind of filter this information and make it digestible with our transparency collaborators like Mindful Materials and others, to be further delivered out to our partners and our designers and engineers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of technology out there, and the important thing to know here is that companies are using them. They're trying to know their supply chains. They want to know their supply chains, and they want to get smarter about what they're doing. And they understand that there's a risk of forced labor, and that to strengthen their supply chains, fair labor comes right with it. So that's an important point to be making here. And then we get to some of our pilot projects. So our pilot project program is very special. It's only been around for 3 or 4 years, actually, at this point, which is quite surprising. We take on a very limited number of projects every year, and I'll get into that process a little bit later. But it's important to know that our team takes we give a lot of care and interest to our different pilot projects, and you can see that we are really interested to expand our work and to go global and continue to show how Design for Freedom can bring value to different projects around the world. So I'm just going to start with a couple of synopsis stories here, thinking about some of our pilots and the information that was gleaned from them. This was our first completed pilot project. It was the Serpentine Pavilion in 2022, designed by Theaster Gates. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Serpentine Pavilion that happens annually in London. We were able to we looked at 5 main materials on the project. It was a pavilion. So at that time, earlier days in Design for Freedom, we required only 5 materials to be looked at. Certifications did come out of that, including FSC wood, which is important to this conversation here. So again, I want to ground you a little bit in 2022, a little bit behind the scenes about Serpentine Pavilion. The designer is named, and very much the design process happens in the early first half of the year, including, that fabrication process. So very much in February 22, it's a very, very quick process. And as you understand, in February 2022, Russia invaded the Ukraine. For further context, Russia is one of the world's largest timber exporters, accounting for about 22% of the world's wood trade, which is staggering, certainly when you think about suppliers in the continent. And then here, it was important for us to understand that geopolitical landscape had changed, and for different reasons, of course, that we would not be purchasing any wood or sourcing wood from Russia. And along with that, and it was good to know that FSC actually moved very quickly. So in March 4th, they had suspended all training certificates in both Russia and Belarus. So understanding that FSC had really only started to bring core labor inputs about 6 months prior in late 2021 and moved quickly to respond to this geopolitical situation. And that's important to know. And we were able to actually ultimately supply FSC certified wood from Finland and move forward with the pavilion. The Russian export trade actually went down. I don't know if it was specifically for this reason, but for other reasons. But there was actually a 30% decrease in the following year, which is important to note. One of our second pilot projects is called Shadow of a Face, which is in Newark, New Jersey. This is a pilot project designed by Nina Cook-John. It is a Harriet Tubman monument. And it's important to note here that we also looked at about 5 materials, including certifications. Again, as a small project, we were able to piece together the steel supply chain because of the safety and material test reports, which was really interesting to see some of that sustainability information come together through the supply chain. In addition, also more sustainability information. They had an EPD. We were able to trace where the cement came from the extraction level in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. So that was an interesting piece to really start to think about supply chains and how can we leverage the data that already exists. We also did the Big Fork Library, which was a great library out in Big Fork, Montana. This was a wonderful group of Cushing Terrell, Martel Imagine If Library Foundation. Cushing Terrell was a huge champion for us since the beginning. They looked at 8 different materials. And this is actually a case study on our website. I would highly encourage you to take a look at if you're interested in a pilot project, because there was a lot of really step-by-step instructions on how they use the tools, what came in first, what came in second, that came into play, and how to get this process through in their firm and through their workflow. Another really great project that's under construction right now is Haller and Yoon and Hamburg architects at the Karsh Institute of Democracy at the University of Virginia that will be realized by Horgan Construction. And this is really core to the mission of the Karsh Institute, thinking about the materials and there are other certifications they could have used, but they really wanted to talk about design for freedom because of how it worked with the concept of the building and the future, vision for that space. So that was a really great partner. We're excited to see more come out of that next year. I can't believe already, but yeah. And then another really great project will be at the Battery Park Field House down at the lower tip of Manhattan with WXY architecture and urban design. So very keen to have this as a, public space that can speak to the city of New York, thinking about these materials. And if you are able to make it to Design for Freedom, or if you're able to make it to Design for Freedom Summit or Grace Farms, we welcome you to come visit us and we have a With Every Fiber exhibit. This is our first ever exhibit on site dedicated entirely to Design for Freedom. This is actually, we're already revamping the space. But it is a hopeful space that sort of brings a lot of our toolkit to life, so our visitors can kind of interact and read more. There's some really exciting materials in this one, specifically about agro-waste material, weavings and different types of biomaterials, things like along those lines. And that was also a pilot project for us. So you all understand, we trace all the materials into the space, and we do this every day here at Grace Farms as we continue to source new items for the building. And so our processes, I now just have a few more kind of wrap up ways for you all to continue to engage with Design for Freedom before we get into our Q&A here. But for our pilot projects, we actually have an open call RFP, and we keep that'll be launching at the end of October with a submission date in December 5th, 2025. So we love to get those at the end of the calendar year with the hope to be able to announce them in March at our summit the following year. So if you have a pilot project you are interested, and we'd like, especially because this is a new group for us, I'd like to kind of bring up, we'd love to show new types of pilot projects. So it's been really rewarding to be in the public space and the art space, et cetera, et cetera. But if there's other projects out there that we can show Design for Freedom creates value, we would be really happy to explore those projects with you and new locations as well. So just like to reiterate that for everyone. We also have a Design for Freedom podcast available wherever you listen to your podcast. So we have 3 so far. One thinking about natural stone and Venice Biennale, and then a little bit of an introduction and origin story from our CEO and founder, Sharon Prince, which you may find interesting if you if you haven't heard of Design for Freedom before. It's really a great framework for our mission and our work with the initiative. And then of course, save the date for our summit. This is a little snippet. This is literally one of our busiest days at Grace Farms. We have over 500 people come. They spread throughout the landscape of the site. And it's really an inspiring and exciting day. So mark your calendar for March 26th, 2026, hoping that everyone remembers the 26th too at the same time. And then finally, in conclusion, we have harnessed the knowledge and insight of our partners and team to advance this non-negotiable challenge that every building should be designed and built for freedom. And, we all have agency, as we said, and Nora said before in the beginning, that to design for freedom. And that's where we're coming here too. And everyone brings their own piece to the table here, which is really exciting. So pass it over to everyone else, Kayla and Nora, if we wanted to go ahead and get into the Q&A.
Awesome. All right. So, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to start dropping those in there. We do have one question so far, so we'll go ahead and get started here. All right, so this person's saying, I am very intrigued by this topic. Thank you so much for speaking about this. Have there been any cost comparisons between typical construction and construction that prioritizes using materials that do not use forced labor? I imagine it's much more expensive. Is that true? How can we make ethical construction affordable if that is an issue?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question, and one that we definitely get often. I will say that it really depends. So one of the things that we, and Brigid touched on this, is we're not asking folks to go out there and say, I'm going to look at every material in a building and make sure the entire thing is forced labor free. We don't think the material transparency market is there. We don't think the industry is there yet. What we are asking folks to do is look at a subset of materials. So let's say you're going to look at concrete, right? That's a pretty relatively regional, local material that you can kind of break down the components that go into it and be able to track where it's coming from. So it's really more about knowing the supply chain of a product, figuring out where it's coming from. We have seen increases certainly in the amount of time it takes to have these conversations with suppliers and manufacturers. So there's definitely an increase there in staff time, in the research time, and documentation time for sure. What we haven't seen is that every product that is being ethically sourced is not more expensive. Some of them for sure are, but some of them are really great small to medium-sized businesses that are regional, local and regional to a particular project, that are really great options. So the answer, unfortunately, is sometimes yes, a product can cost more, but it's definitely not across the board. I would advise factoring in a little bit of staff time to be doing this due diligence, to be having these conversations. And this is definitely something that we're tracking going forward. As we expand our pilot project program, we are starting to look at how much time is going into these projects, and certainly is there an upcharge for particular material.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that. All right. Doesn't look like there's any other questions at the moment. But folks, if you think of anything else, feel free to drop it in the post-webinar survey as well.
I can
Other
even piggyback a little bit on that one, last question. That Big Fork case study is really nice, because it was on a modest budget. It was formerly a church hall that was designed into a beautiful new space for the community. And, there were some really nice partners in there that, on that tight budget, that we were able to make that happen. So again, just to underscore that DFF brings value to different types of projects, depending on your community and your city and what the design team is behind too. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And actually, while you were talking, there was another question that came in, so we can go ahead and jump to this one real quick since we have time. Are there comparable organizations in Canada similar to yours?
I would say that there's probably not a similar organization to ours anywhere in the world, but I understand the question. We do work globally. So Design for Freedom is a global initiative. It is not specific here to the United States. We do have pilot projects around the world. We do have partners around the world. We have some great Canadian partners. Last year at our summit, we actually featured an entire team from Vancouver who had come down from Haida Gwaii and really dove into what is the forestry industry looking like in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in that region of Canada. What are some of the areas of risk? How can we reduce that exploitation? We've got some great partners, certainly around the country that we're working with. So yes, we're working with Canada. We're happy to have anyone around the world join us in this work, and we try and make our tools and our materials available to anyone working in any region.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Well, I think that's it for now. So would you like to wrap us up with any final notes or comments?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to Acelab for inviting us here today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Some some great areas of engagement. I know Jackie's been really helpful in dropping some things in the chat. So read the toolkit, download it, it's free, sign up for our newsletter. Brigid and I host office hours once a month. You can also sign up for those free on our website. So if we've piqued a little bit of interest here and you have some more questions, always happy to have folks pop in. And, you know, as you embark on kind of this holistic material transparency journey, feel free to reach out to us. Where we try to make ourselves available as possible. And again, if you can attend the summit in March, it's really just such a fantastic event, and it's our 5th year. So we're super excited to build on the momentum.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, both. Yeah, this was really a wonderful conversation to have, and it's really great to partner with Acelab and to see how we continue to grow together. So excited.
Yes, we appreciate your time as well. I think this is a really powerful presentation, so thank you for that, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thanks all.